Chapter 11. The Next Step. Eventually, I met a lady that we will call Isabel. Isabel helped me kickstart my transformation toward a better life. Within 3 weeks of meeting her, we decided to move in together, and I very quickly began to see my life in a much more positive light. Isabel brought much joy to my life, and we helped each other to become more aware of our needs. We were very similar in many ways, and being around her taught me more about myself. After just 2 months together, I visited my doctor to discuss the possibility of coming off my medication. The doctor suggested that a reduction from 60 micrograms gradually down to 10 micrograms would be the best that I could hope for. He went on to say that I had an hormone imbalance in my brain and that becoming totally medication free was not going to be an option. I left the surgery, and I don't know how, but at the time I somehow knew that he was wrong. I now know that he was speaking to me from the ego prison, which I will explain in more detail shortly. Within 3 months, I was totally off medication, which finally gave a voice to the silenced angel on my shoulder, and so my devil regained an adversary. My transformation had begun. Chapter 12. Transformation. My connection with Isabel was very intense indeed. It gave me the same feeling that I experienced in my interactions with my dying brother. We were able to speak openly and honestly about anything, exchanging and experiencing love frequently. I felt secure consistently due to having this steady exchange of love. When intimacy through sex is the main way with which you communicate love, then in an attempt to maintain the interest, you may, as many do, begin to push the boundaries beyond your own morality. That's the devil taking control. Without the ability to communicate with speech, thoughts, actions and emotions, as well as with sexual intimacy, then just like having the same meal every day would become boring, then so does the same kind of sexual intimacy. If you rely mainly on sexual intimacy and don't push the boundaries, then boredom often creeps in. So instead of producing love through titillation, the boredom drains love, which leads to insecurity once more. Insecurity will bring back the less caring strategies that you have designed to gain the love that you need. Initially though, when the love exchange flows, then the feeling is wonderful. Some people refer to this time in the relationship as the honeymoon period. With Isabel, the regular exchange of love confirmed to me that love truly existed, something that I had doubted for a long time. I began listening to love songs and finally understood what they were singing about. I used to really dislike romantic songs and movies, but I was at last allowing myself to experience love. I lived with Isabel for just over 2 years, and when the love was low and the poor strategies resurfaced, we would argue and I would leave. I would return days later to start the cycle all over again. Many times I left in those 2 years, but our addiction to love kept forcing us to keep trying. At the time, we were both unable to learn any other way. Question: why does love fluctuate so much? Question: and why did it affect my demeanour? While in the relationship with Isabel, my feeling of love and subsequently my confidence due to that love generally remained at its highest level since before I can remember. This happiness was mainly due to feeling more secure. The positivity which those feelings brought opened the door for me to experience the true gifts from my subconscious. Your spirit or subconscious connection leads you with positive guidance. However, when your self-maintenance is poor and your demeanour is negative, you are no longer able to see your guidance. Thus, with this regular love flow and the positivity it promoted, I began to receive pictures in my mind's eye. These pictures formed in a place that for many years was filled with blackness. Initially, the images were of my brother, who, as I wrote earlier, had passed away. The information that I gathered from debates I had with my ex-wife came in very useful, her being a working clairvoyant medium. I was very cynical of clairvoyance and such things. However, our debates regarding mediumship helped me to quickly recognise what the pictures were. I went to the local spiritualist church, where I explained to the leader there about the pictures that I was receiving. The president of the church suggested that I attend their development circle. She also added that I needed to join the church if I wished to develop in the circle. As I mentioned earlier in the book, I was never a joiner of anything, so I refused. I decided instead to make my own way, and so I began asking people to be my guinea pig by allowing me to hold their hand and see what pictures I received. Here are a few examples. Whilst holding one girl's hand, I received a picture of a beautiful Santa Claus. He had a lovely red costume with snowy white trim and perfect white hair and beard. Santa had big rosy cheeks and a kind smile. After studying the picture for a while, I finally asked the girl if last Christmas was a particularly nice one. The girl smiled and said yes. I felt excitement at the girl's response, a new kind of excitement. Then I said to the girl that I had a picture of a panda. I questioned in my head what a panda meant. Then instinctively I knew. I said to the girl that I am being shown that you and your partner are having trouble getting pregnant. That is so true, she said, but how did you get that from a picture of a panda? I went on to explain that a TV programme came into my mind, which was about pandas, and I remember the programme mentioning that pandas struggle to mate and rarely conceived. That is amazing, the girl said. How you understand the pictures. I was so excited that the girl could take what I was saying. It sounds simple when I write about it, but it wasn't. I worked very hard to see the pictures, probably too hard, if I'm honest. With this new kind of excitement and my addictive personality, I was driven to uncover more about it. I remember the first full message that I gave to a person, clairvoyantly. It was a reading for a friend of a friend. The lady, who I had never met before, asked me to give her some proof of the afterlife. When I asked to be given a picture for the lady, I received a picture of Liz Dawn, Vera Duckworth, from Coronation Street. But I didn't say Vera Duckworth. I knew somehow to say that I have Vera here. And then instantly I saw a picture of a plant called Mother-in-law's Tongue. Vera is your mother-in-law, I said. Yes, said the lady. I then saw a teddy bear and I explained to the lady that Vera wished to give her a big hug. That was it. I was hooked and keen to know more. It may seem very short and sweet to you, the reader, but I could see it meant so much to the lady. I was filled with exciting love, a new excitement that was even better than sex. My pictures soon developed, and so did my life. Isabel's sister-in-law, who had herself been one of my guinea pigs, suggested I attended a group of a female medium who she knew. The medium's name was Jessie, and a new group had just been advertised in the local paper. I noted her phone number and called her the very next day. Hello, is that Jessie? I asked. Yes, came the reply. I went on to explain how I had received her contact details. She said that her group was for advanced mediums, and she stressed that the class covered a lot of theory about spiritualism. I shuddered at the talk of theory, thinking back to my school days, and I mentioned my reservations to her. She said if you struggle to commit, then maybe it would be best if you gave the group a miss. I asked how much the class cost. £20 a session was her answer. I thought it was a little bit expensive, but I said nothing. I went on to say that I would give it some thought. I thanked her for the time and then put the phone down. Money was short for me at the time, and the thought of theory rather than practical had made up my mind. Or so I thought. On many occasions over the following week, Jessie's name was in my head. So eventually I decided to call her and tell her the fact. She arranged for me to see her the following day. Our appointment was for 11 o'clock, and I arrived at Jessie's house just before 11. After knocking twice on the door opened to reveal a lady of about 60 or so. She had a slim build and a welcoming smile. "Come on in, my love," she said. I was then offered a drink and a seat at the kitchen table. Jessie appeared to be studying me, and I felt quite nervous for some reason. After completing the introductions and receiving my coffee, Jessie began questioning me. She asked me what had brought me to her door, and I went on to tell her about my pictures. She then asked me what my interests were. I said I liked football and I love music. She didn't reply and seemed to be staring beyond me. She eventually asked me what I thought was a very strange question. "What would you talk about if you were at a dinner party?" I thought about it, and then almost straight away the word birthdays came out of my mouth, almost without me realising it. "I've become interested in birthdays," I said. She told me that birthdays may be my base. I asked her what she meant by base. She explained that birthdays would be the base of my mediumship and the way that I would help people. Jessie said that I had done very well, developing myself on my own. She went on to offer me a place in her group. I explained about my financial situation, and she said that I could attend her group for free. I attended Jessie's classes for the next 3 months, and I learnt quite a lot about the spiritual side of life. Jessie had groups on 5 days of the week. She asked me to attend all of them, which I loved. Back in my day-to-day life, I had left my job as a social worker, and I was looking for work. Jessie's classes were on a night time, so when I was offered a temporary job on nights, I felt I had to decline. The direction in which the classes were taking my life seemed for some reason very important to me. Isabel felt differently, and she was annoyed in the fact that I wouldn't take the night work. My refusal created a divide between us, and we ended up separating. Ironically, I ended up moving back to Hemsworth, so I was no longer able to attend Jessie's classes anyway. Isabel and I spoke many times about getting back together. She said that she had things she wished to work through, things she wished to face alone. I told her that I would wait for her. After 2 months, she refused to speak to me, and we never spoke again. The next 15 months were among the hardest months of my life. During this time, I started work as a porter at the local hospital. I seemed fine on the outside, but believe me, I was struggling without Isabel and the love that we exchanged. I was experiencing what I now know to be bereavement. Question: why did I feel so vulnerable without Isabel? Question: why had I gone downhill once more? I felt so needy, but I tried hard to wait for Isabel and do what I thought was right. After leaving Isabel and moving back to Hemsworth, I began attending spiritualist churches. As a non-member, obviously. I didn't know at the time why, but I seemed to gain peace from attending these churches. That, and getting the odd bit of proof that our loved ones still existed somewhere, made it worthwhile for me. Whilst attending one particular church, I met a lady that we will call Tessa. For some unknown reason I was drawn to Tessa, but not in a sexual way. After meeting her on a few occasions and discussing her spiritual work, I plucked up the courage to ask her if she would help me to understand more about it. Tessa flatly refused me. She stated that she taught one person at a time and said she already had a student. It was a couple of weeks later when I met up with Tessa again. Then out of the blue, she said to me that she'd decided to be my teacher after all. I asked her what had changed her mind. She explained to me that her own teacher, her guide, had told her that she must accept me as a student. I wasn't totally convinced with her talk of guides, but my mind was opening. Over the past few years, I've used this analogy to explain, in simple terms, my life. There are 4 places a person can be in life. They can be sensitive or insensitive, or somewhere in between. They can be logical or away with the fairies, or somewhere in between. I have learned that once you have been to all four places, then you judge no one and understand most. This was my time for learning about the fairies. Tessa was the one who watched over my awakening. I was still struggling through, trying to understand why I felt so shaky and vulnerable. After months of being without Isabel, which to many people may seem trivial, but to an extremely vulnerable and needy person, whose main coping strategy had been intimacy with females for over 30 years, it was hell. Depression gradually began to rear its gloomy head once again. When I was in an extremely wobbly mood, I found Tessa to be very supportive. Wobbly, for anyone who is unaware of the term, is when you are so vulnerable and anxious that your whole being is shaking to its core. If you have never wobbled, then you won't understand. When I wobbled, I would ring Tessa, and either she would come to me or I would go to her. Tessa would help me by talking to me or encouraging me to share a meditation with her. When I felt at my worst, she would give me hands-on healing. Tessa made herself available to me 24/7. She watched over me through the worst months of my life, and I owe so much to her and her understanding husband. She helped me to think my way through my feelings and taught me how to meditate. Tessa's guide would communicate with my helpers and relay the information needed for my growth. How I hated that I had lost control. The fact that Tessa could communicate with my guide helpers via her guides, and the fact that I couldn't, left me feeling powerless. The very personal proof that Tessa offered me was undisputable, even to a very sceptical, logical person like I was at the time. If I ever get to know you well, then please ask me about the proof I was given, because it was amazing, truly amazing. Tessa was akin to my guardian angel. God knows where I would have ended up without her. I take this opportunity to thank Tessa for pointing me in the right direction and providing me with some knowledge to set me back on my way. Around this time, my path included working as a hospital porter. On a good day at work, I would talk to the patients and try to entertain them. On a bad day, I would merely push the patient to his or her destination. There were many occasions when patients uplifted me. On a really bad day, I would have to go home. It is important that you understand the emotional place that I attempt to describe. Only those who are there or who have been there will understand. I write not for pity, but rather in hope that you identify or recognise similar feelings from your own experiences. I believe many of you reading this book will recognise the place that I struggle to paint for you. The wobbles were becoming more and more frequent, but I really tried to hide them. Luckily, my feelings weren't visible to the majority, because like me at the time, many people are totally oblivious to the signs and symptoms of those who suffer internally. Chapter 13. Strange Guidance. At one spiritualist church that I attended, the medium who was working asked if she could work with me. The message that followed was coded so only I understood its relevance. The lady said that spirit are proud of you, and they are telling me that you are going in the right direction. However, at present, your loved ones are worried about you. They're saying that the snow is returning and it's now up to your chin. So they wish to melt the snow to free your bottom half. The medium admitted to not understanding the message. She said she hoped it made some sense. As strange as this message sounded, it made total sense to me. After the service was over, the medium came over to me. She asked me if I would mind sharing the meaning of the message. She admitted to feeling intrigued by it. I agreed and began by telling her that I had suffered from depression for many years. I went on to say that the snow she spoke of was the returning depression. Bizarrely, Spirit were guiding me to use my old coping strategy of intimacy with ladies. Then that would help me deal with my depression. I told her that was the reason why they were melting the snow, to free my lower body, so I can have the intimacy that I need. The lady was gobsmacked. I said that I didn't mean to offend her, and stressed that I was only translating the information. She said that she couldn't understand why Spirit would give such a message. I reiterated that I didn't wish to offend her, but stressed that in my experience, Spirit or the subconscious connection we have, teaches us in any way that they can. Anyway, I began to meet women again, but with a difference this time. Whenever I met a woman and the possibility of sexual intimacy arrived, something would stop me from taking things any further. I would get a vision of a wounded deer in my mind's eye, and so I would refrain from taking things any further. I then found that women would begin to divulge things, personal things about their life, ordeals that they had experienced. These interactions reminded me of the verbal intimacy I shared with my brother. Therefore, the message I'd received from the medium made much more sense now. The intimacy that I took to mean sex turned out to mean intimacy of a different kind. Tessa and I would often meet up and meditate, and eventually, with her help, I was able to communicate with my own spirit guides. I was also taught the following meditation by a lady who organised a private meditation class. After this one meditation, I went from not being able to see or communicate with a guide to meeting and communicating with many of them. I attended just 2 private sessions, and these sessions were the beginning of me moving away from Tessa's apron strings. For those people who have yet to explore the less logical side of life, then reading about guides and communicating with passed over loved ones may well leave you feeling awkward. Maybe you could try a version of this exercise. When I'm away from my friends and loved ones, and I would like to have a clue to how they are feeling, I would think about them, and by doing so, I would receive a video of them in my mind. When I asked a question about how my loved one was feeling, then the video would play. For example, I would ask how their day is going. Then I may see my friend walking barefoot on a lovely sandy beach. Or maybe I'd see them skipping around. Alternatively, they may be pulling heavy sacks around. Each video picture depicts an idea of how my loved one's day was going. I believe our subconscious connection speaks to us in any way we choose. This is an example of how I tap into that connection. Maybe it will work for you too. I use this method to prove the connection to a friend. We sat at the table together, and I asked out loud, "How is my son feeling?" I then saw my son hopping around, like he had stood on a nail. All this I said so my friend could hear me. I then rang my son and put the phone on loudspeaker. I asked him what he'd been doing. He said that he was out walking with the children. So I asked him if he'd stood on a nail. He says yes. How did you know? Very accurate and a true story. Later in this book, I will give you an example of how much I trust this connection. So back to telling you about the meditation group. Just like my method of visualizing loved ones, this meditation sets a framework for the subconscious to communicate. Through using this meditation, I met my doorkeeper and 3 other guides. The meditation was based around lifts, 3 lifts to be precise. My doorkeeper, a young woman called Scylla, walked me to the lift and acted like a porter, opening the doors and basically watching over me. I entered the first lift and ascended to the 10th floor, where I met an Indian guide called Golden Eagle. I called him Sam. Much later, I found out that this lift, lift 1, was my clairvoyant lift. In the second lift, on the 10th floor, I met a young Indian boy. I never knew his name, but in his headdress he had only 1 feather. That 1 feather was for the most important lesson of my life. So important was that lesson, it deserved a full chapter for itself. C. Lesson in Love. After learning the young boy's lesson, he then moved on. The second lift was occupied by Hassan, a very muscular African man. Lift 2 turned out to be my healing lift. In lift 3 on the 10th floor, I met a young girl with long blonde hair. She was wearing a lemon dress and I never received her name, and she moved on very quickly. She was replaced by an Edwardian lady in a green dress. Over a couple of months I noticed that the Edwardian lady was around me often and she would come very, very close. I could feel her at the back of my neck. I finally decided to sit down and communicate with her. As I remember, It was just before Christmas, and I was sitting and having a drink with my second wife. I began to feel the lady at the back of my neck, and I told my wife that I was going to find out what this lady wanted. So I went to the only quiet place in a house full of children, the bathroom. I locked the door behind me and sat on the toilet, waiting to feel the lady come close. Once closer, I asked her what her name was. She gave me a picture in my mind's eye of the mother character from the TV programme Little House on the Prairie. I asked her if her name was Caroline, and she nodded to confirm. All my guides, when asked, have given me their names. However, on this occasion, for some reason, I asked her for further proof. I was then shown a video of my daughter on a merry-go-round. As always, my phone was by my side, so I decided to ring my daughter to find out where she was. My daughter lived with her mother, and so I had no idea where she may be. When I got through to my daughter, I asked her where she was. She says that she was at the local Christmas fair, so she was near a roundabout. I told her that I loved her and said that I would ring her later and ask her all about the fair. The reason I asked for further proof from Caroline, I now know, was because lift 3, where she resided, was for my trance guides. Anyone who understands how trance works will know that allowing spirit energy to shadow your own energy so closely takes a lot of trust. Hence why I was inspired to ask her for further proof, to gain more trust. To be honest, I haven't used the lifts as my means of communicating for quite some time. I am now able to link to the subconscious world without the use of the lifts. At this time of my learning, I learned from people who use the terms spirits, guides, etc. Just words that describe the subconscious connection we all share. Back in my day-to-day life, I was waiting for Isabel, who was never far from my mind. And I was shown on many occasions that waiting for her was the right thing to do. The signs guiding me to do so were almost unbelievably clear. I remember one such sign. I was at work at the hospital, and I was waiting for my next job to come through on the radio. I decided to make use of my downtime to call Isabel, but she still refused to speak to me. She would answer my call and then put the phone on the worktop. I could hear her walking around the kitchen, but she refused to talk to me. Before I tell you about the guidance, it's time to explain why Isabel refused to talk to me. One day, Isabel and I were laid on the sofa listening to some chill-out music. We were nice and relaxed when all of a sudden I asked a rather strange question. I asked Isabel to tell me something about herself, something that no one else knew. Isabel, who still seemed relaxed, began telling me about her secret, describing how she was sexually abused by her grandfather. She went into much details that I will not divulge here. Just to reassure you, the reader, all the names in this book, except mine and Vic's, have been changed to protect their privacy. Once Isabel had finished her disclosure, she said that she felt shocked, that she'd finally spoken about it. She said that she had never spoken about it to anyone else before. Her grandfather had passed away, and now only Isabel and I knew the truth. A month or so after her disclosure, Isabel asked if we could take a break in our relationship. She went on to say that she couldn't stop thinking about her abuse now. She said, "Now it's out of the box, I can't put it back in." Isabel said that she wished to seek out help, but stressed that she wanted to do it alone. I agreed and promised that I would wait for her. So back to the phone call. So Isabel still couldn't bring herself to talk to me. Anger welled up inside me, so I ended the call and I cursed her ignorance. As I put the phone down, I screamed, "I'm done with you, girl!" or words to that effect. Just then, my radio went off with my next job. I arrived at radiography to collect a patient who was to be transported to another department. I collected the patient's notes, checking the name and date of birth on the front just to make sure we had the correct ones. My interest in birth signs had reappeared whilst working at the hospital, and I was quite taken aback to read that the patient's birthday was the same as Isabel's. How bizarre, I thought. I introduced myself to the patient, And once we were on our way, I mentioned that her, the patient, shared her birthday with my ex-girlfriend. Really, she said. I went on to explain that I was very interested in people's birthdays and how they seem to explain a lot about a person. She says, I'm intrigued now, and she asked me to tell her more about it. After giving her what my thoughts were about a Sagittarian, she said that it was strange how I knew a lot about her character just by using her birthday. I told her that although birthdays are quite accurate, I still feel that some people are not true to their birth date. I asked the patient if she was married, and she said yes. She went on to say that her and her husband had been married for 32 years. She also mentioned that she didn't know what she would do without him and his support. I remarked on how lovely it was to hear about people who work well together. It makes a refreshing change from the people who usually complain about their partners. I asked her, what's your husband's birthday? To which she replied, he's a Leo, born on the 17th of August. I could hardly get the words out of my mouth quick enough. That's my birthday, I said. I gave her a brief outline of the phone call to Isabel. The patient was as amazed as I was. How bizarre that after the phone call where I had decided to wash my hands of Isabel, the very next patient had Isabel's birthday, and her husband had mine. I felt such a spring in my step. I also had fresh intent that I would be continuing my wait for Isabel. Further along in the book, I will share with you more of these signpost experiences.